Good evening, everybody. You know, this feels like a long time coming, but let me just, thank you for that applause. My name is Catherine Pugh, for those who don't know it, the Mayor of Baltimore City, and this is a very important process for us. And let me just say how important this is to me as the mayor of this city. Those of you who know that I came into office on December the 6th, 8th, whenever we were inaugurated, but more importantly, when I came into City Hall, one of the things that I heard loud and clear, folks kept saying, the mayor needs to sign the consent decree. What they did not know was that there was not a consent decree on my desk to be signed, and that we needed to put together a document for the Department of Justice as well as for the judge, because it was important that we recognize that the community's voice needed to be heard. And while people were talking about the need for a consent decree, what they didn't realize was the work that goes into crafting one. And let me just, for your information, those of you who are familiar with consent decrees in other cities recognize that in Ferguson, with 50 police officers, it took them 13 months to craft a consent decree. In New Orleans, with half the size police force that we have, it took them 14 months. Our team came together with the law department, with our members of our police department, our community, listening to the voices of the people. It took us 60 some odd days to complete this document. And I tell folks that as we were coming into City Hall with all of the voices that we were hearing, you know, the people didn't really understand the process that takes place. And so I am grateful to the team who worked diligently every day. And I think the Department of Justice would say, and even my law department, that there were 16-hour days. And I'll never forget hearing from my city solicitor, there was a question being asked, and I was on the phone, and he said, I'll get back to you. So that was around 1 o'clock in the morning. So at 1:30 a.m. in the morning, I called him back. He says, what are you doing up still, Madam Mayor? I said, I'm waiting for you to call me back. But we worked by phone, we worked in person, we worked together, but more importantly, I think we crafted a document that will help us move our police department forward. And here's some of the things that we recognize: that there needed to be a better relationship with our police department and our community. We also recognize that there needed to be additional training for our police department. We also realized that we needed to build the trust in our community, because working with the police department, a department that you trust, would help us to resolve some of the crime problems that we face in our city every single day. We also realized that there were voices that felt that they would not be heard in this process. So every chance we got, even up to the point when we went to the court, we allowed the voices of our community to speak out. And I shouldn't say allow, because they were going to speak out anyway. But we were grateful for the voices that continued to speak out on behalf of the need for this document to be done. And so we got it done. We've gone through the process of listening to folks, soliciting those who would want to become the monitors for this. We've already set up our citizens team. But we also realize that the monitor is really important. And my hope is that those who are here will ask questions after listening and understand how significant the role of the monitoring team is. I believe that they must represent the community. I believe that they must also understand police departments. I also think that they need to have some recognition of the importance of community and how much community input is for this process to work. What we do know is that some cities have stayed under consent decrees for as long as 12 years. This is not an inexpensive process, but it is a necessary process. So my hope this evening is that you hear from those who are now seeking to be the monitors for our city, and that you listen carefully to what they are offering as monitors for this process. And what I hope is that you will hear what you think is needed for Baltimore. So when the questioning period comes up, my hope is that you will stand up and ask the questions that you feel need to be answered. I know that the Department of Justice will also take in writing comments that you want to submit, and you can submit those at consentdecree@usdoj.gov. So if there's somebody here that wants to write out their response, please do that. And I will repeat that again, so those who have pens, paper, would want to write this down. It is consentdecree@usdoj.gov. That has to be submitted no later than August the 23rd. Government and the Baltimore Police Department cannot do this transformation by itself. We need a monitoring team. That is this process. So again, I want to thank each and every one of you who are in this room, and I ask you please to listen carefully and make sure you ascertain what you think is necessary in terms of this monitoring process that is before us. So again, thank you all for being here, and I look forward to the outcome of this process. Can I take a moment and acknowledge Erica? Erica, thank you for being here. The No Boundaries Coalition here, there are a number of groups and organizations, and I said to the media, don't be fooled by the numbers that sit in this auditorium. Because what I see around me are people whose feet are on the ground, who represents groups and organizations. And the reason that I acknowledged Erica is because of the ceasefire event that took place in our city. And I'm so grateful to so many people who are out there, because when we said call to action, get in the action, I didn't tell people when, I didn't tell people where, but what I feel is that some folks were listening and they didn't wait for us to say go here or go there. They're taking it upon themselves to move in the best interests of the city. So I thank all of you who are on the ground every single day, laboring on behalf of the citizens of Baltimore, pushing our city forward, believing that we can be a great city, but it's how we continue to work together. Again, I applaud this process. I look forward to the outcome. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I'm Tim McGatt, and I want to welcome you also on behalf of the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division. And thank you for all coming to this public forum this evening, where you have the opportunity to meet and ask questions of the candidates that we have here tonight for the monitor of the consent decree that the mayor has already described. I will agree with the mayor that there were some late nights in that negotiation process. I was a part of a few of those myself, and I think that we all got to a place where we have an agreement now that can move us all forward, and we were glad to put in those hours because we can all be in service to all of you together, serving the community of the city of Baltimore. So community involvement is essential to this project going forward. It's essential to the success of the consent decree, and the diverse communities of Baltimore have to have confidence in the process, and part of that confidence is confidence in the monitoring team that is going to be selected as an agent of the court to ensure that the consent decree is implemented in a way that is fair, it's impartial, we have an honest broker in the monitoring team that fulfills all of its duties, and that you have faith in to actually report back to you about the progress that's being made under the consent decree. So the monitor has to earn that trust of the diverse communities of Baltimore, and that includes all of you here in this room tonight. It needs to earn the trust of every single one of you. And I think that the way that the monitoring team can gain that trust, it is critical that that monitor is transparent to the public in the way that it acts, It's on time in the services it delivers to the city of Baltimore. It's cost effective for the city of Baltimore so that the city can meet the many obligations that it has to its citizens. It also needs to be practical, and most critically, it needs to promote public safety, officer safety, respect for the Constitution, and public confidence in the police department and in our governmental institutions that are designed to serve the people of Baltimore. So we ask that you, whichever candidate is chosen, whichever candidate you like out of this process tonight, we ask that you stay engaged to ensure that this process continues. The monitoring team will need you to be engaged. We at the Department of Justice need you to be engaged. The city and the Baltimore Police Department need you to be engaged every step of the way going forward here to ensure that you hold all of us accountable to be doing the job, the role that we have in this process. And so what we want you to have the opportunity to do here tonight is to meet these potential monitoring teams and hear for yourself from them, engage for yourself who can serve the city of Baltimore. Thank you all for coming tonight. We really appreciate it. I also wanted just to quickly flag that if you need any sign language interpretation, we have a sign language interpreter down to my left who would be happy to assist you. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor and Mr. McGatt. Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Welcome to the first of 2 community forums for the Consent Decree Independent Monitor finalists. Thank you for coming. My name is Shantae Guy, and I'm the Executive Director at Baltimore Community Mediation Center, and I'll be your moderator this evening. Before we give the Monitor finalists the opportunity to introduce themselves, I'd like to share the schedule for the evening with you, along with expectations and requests around engagement. So with that out of the way, we'll have our Monitor finalists introduce themselves, taking no more than 1 minute to do so. And we'll start with CNA.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Rodney Monroe, retired chief from Charlotte, North Carolina. I am designated as the proposed monitor for the Baltimore Consent Decree.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Dr. Johnny Rice II. I'm Assistant Associate Professor at Coppin State University, and I'm the Community Liaison for this effort. Excited to be here.
Thank you, CNA. Next up is Venable.
Good evening. My name is Ken Thompson. I'm the proposed monitor from the Venable team. I'm a lifelong lawyer in Baltimore City. Let me introduce one of my experts, Dr. Lambert.
I'm John Lambert, and I am an expert in statistics and in working in racial bias and bias-based policing.
Thank you, Venable. Next up is the Powers Group.
Good evening. I'm Dr. Tyrone Powers. I am the proposed monitor and the CEO and founder of the Powers Consulting Group. To my right here is Chief Judge Philip Nichols, retired former Chief Judge of the Circuit Court of Prince George's County.
Thank you.
And he's a deputy monitor on our team.
Thank you. And next up is Exeter.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. My name is Jeff Schlanger. I am the proposed monitor for the Exeter 21st Century Policing team. I will be responsible for the overall success of this project and working hand in glove with the deputy monitor, Chuck Ramsey, and I'll let him introduce himself.
I'm Charles Ramsey. I'll serve as the Deputy Monitor for the Exeter 21st Century Policing Team. I'm the former Police Commissioner in Philadelphia, former Police Chief in Washington, D.C., and I was the co-chair of President Obama's Task Force on 21st Century Policing.
Thank you all for your introductions. We'll start with the questions. The first question is around community trust. We'll be starting with CNA. How will your members overcome the distrust community members have for law enforcement, both on your team and in BPD, and how will you help BPD officers gain the trust of community members that helps make Baltimore a safer city?
The CNA team has really researched this issue greatly, and I think we heard the mayor speak earlier about the community engagement that was involved in the development of the consent decree. We see that throughout the consent decree. We see where the community has a vital role in ensuring that the various elements of the consent decree are delivered. And the success of this consent decree, yes, the Baltimore Police Department, the City Department of Justice have a significant role in bringing about significant changes. But in order for those changes to take hold, it's going to take an entire community effort to ensure that they are kept aware, that they are kept engaged, and that they help to hold the city and the department and ourselves, the monitors, accountable for the work that we're all committed to delivering. CNA has sought out months ago in identifying resources throughout the Baltimore community as relates to partnering with various individuals in the community to understand some of the issues, following the trends and issues that have occurred within the city over the last couple of years. Part of our proposal includes the partnership with subject matter experts, paid subject matter experts from the community that can help guide us. In addition to forming a community council, paid council, that will help guide us and navigate us into your communities, where each and every one of us will need to be. We will need to be there in order to keep you informed. We would need to be there to solicit your input, your ideas, your thoughts. We would need you in order to hear the policies, procedures, and trainings that's being proposed and talked about, and to get your insight. Our work will not be done behind closed doors.
Thank you, CNA.
Is that it?
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank
Venable?
you.
Thank you. Let me address the trust of the team first. You need to know I'm not from law enforcement. I'm a lifelong resident of Baltimore City. I've practiced law in this city for 40 years. And for the first 10 years of my practice, I was a criminal defense lawyer. So from my perspective, I was actually on the other side of the police department. In terms of my team, and with 13 of us, 6 are from the law enforcement community, others are academics. But the 6 law enforcement folks are very, very special. And I would hope at the end of this proceeding that you would look at their bios. And in fact, I have some with me if you would like to review it. But what you have in front of you are 6 law enforcement folks who are national experts who specialize in constitutional policing from a reform perspective. They are civil rights law enforcement folks. They have served on monitoring teams. They've served as experts in the Department of Justice. And so while they may be law enforcement individuals, they look at law enforcement from a civil rights perspective. Now, in terms of bridging the trust gap between the police and the community, we all have to recognize that's going to take some time. It's going to be a difficult task, but it can be accomplished. And it's going to be accomplished because the consent decree is a great foundation from which to start. And so if we as monitors do our job correctly and assess whether or not the police department and the city are conforming to the consent decree, we have a good start to develop trust between the community and the police department.
Thank you, Venable. Powers Group?
Thank you. I was born and reared in this city, continue to be a resident of this city. Our team have exceptional and unprecedented expertise, national expertise in policing, but also in law. I introduced to you earlier Judge Nicholas, who have certainly made numerous assessments of constitutional rulings. Besides that, we've already been engaged in the community. But I've attended, even prior to this monitoring process, I've been involved in community associations, community groups, community forums. This group assisted in getting the water fountains turned off that were lead poisoning our children in the Baltimore City school system. We filed the injunction to get those water fountains turned off. So we're already engaged. So I think that the people have a sense of integrity and trust with us to an extent already because we've already been out there. Certainly that can be enhanced, and we have to build stronger trust between the police and the community. I think that people know that with us as the monitors, That trust will be built with integrity, that we will certainly engage the community in every aspect of that, which they've already been engaged. We've already had an outreach to the community already. We intend to bring them in as paid individuals and to help us monitor this situation. And briefly, the last part, about 2 minutes, Michelle Mendez.
Hi, good evening, everyone. My name is Michelle Mendez, and I am an immigrants' rights attorney. I'm also the community liaison for our team. The monitoring team is only going to be as successful on building trust between the police and the community if they have credibility with the community. And that's as simple as human relationships and people. At the end of the day, it's about people. So it's really important that the monitoring team look into building these relationships, into building personal relationships between the police and our community so that we can see one another as people and somebody behind the uniform. In my work with immigrants, both in Baltimore and in the state of Maryland, this has been very true.
Exeter?
Thank you very much. How do we bridge the gap? It starts with interaction, one-on-one interactions between police and the communities we serve. Our team has a great deal of experience in bridging that divide. Seattle, Los Angeles, Cleveland, Grand Rapids, Michigan. We also have the pleasure of having 5 members of our team that were part of the President Obama's task force on 21st century policing. And when we came together as a task force, there were only 11 members, 5 of whom, as I said, are part of our team. The very first issue that we chose to take on was building trust and legitimacy. Now, how do you do that? Part of it is having a mindset among police to see themselves as guardians as opposed to warriors. We aren't at war with the communities we serve. We're there to not only protect them against crime and disorder, we're also there to protect their constitutional rights. Now, how do we go about doing that? Obviously, training and education. But a lot of it has to do with police officers understanding the history of policing in America, which has not always been fair. And to this day, there are instances where that treatment of individuals is not fair. That only happens through education and helping them understand that there's a reason why there's more tension in one community versus another, and their responsibility to break down those barriers, learning from the past so that we can move forward in the future. It also involves transparency, making ourselves available, but also information available to the public, providing information, not hiding behind things. When we see things wrong out there, we can't stand behind some of the instances that we've seen on these viral videos of actions on the part of police officers. If they're wrong, they're wrong. We have to call it as such, and we have to be able to deal with it and hold people individually accountable if they aren't serving your community the way you deserve to be served. As far as interaction with community, we plan to come to you, not have you come to us. We're already looking at ways to do that.
Thank you, Exeter. The next question will start with Venable. This question is around biased structural racism and sexual orientation. What's your team's experience in identifying and addressing biased policing, specifically racial, ethnic, and gender bias? Please share examples of law enforcement agencies that realized a reduction in incidences of biased policing after receiving assistance from members of your team.
Specifically, I would, the group that I work with has analyzed and determined whether bias-based policing was occurring in some 35 to 40 jurisdictions around the country. Beginning, since there's so many, I'll talk briefly about 2. One was one of the very early ones that we did, in which we, in a litigation context, analyzed the work of the New Jersey State Police, who were, without a doubt, targeting African American drivers. Following that, there was a consent decree which the Department of Justice entered into with the New Jersey State Police, and there was work for a number of years, and in years following that, we again assessed the stops of the New Jersey State Police, finding that indeed they had reduced their overstopping of African Americans by about 60 to 80%. The second group that I would talk about is Kalamazoo, Michigan, a city where we were invited in to assess the police department, did so, found that they were targeting African Americans, and worked with them to change their policies, to change their procedures, to change many things that were going on. They deleted a group that was stopping African Americans at a much greater rate, and from the chief of police through the command staff, they have been working on that. We will hopefully be able to assess them again in some time. So we have a good deal of experience in assessing these things and making a decision about whether bias policing is happening, and then helping departments begin to control it and to alleviate it.
Powers Group.
Good evening. My name is Robert Plummer. I'm a captain with the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department. And my experience with the bias-based policing is our agency, under our own reform process, created our own procedural justice through non-bias-based policing training program that was used throughout the organization. It's also been shared with other organizations throughout the valley, or throughout the country, Boston, cities in Canada. But as a current bureau commander in Las Vegas, in a community that is specifically African American and Hispanic, one of the challenges that we dealt with was, in fact, where we stop in African Americans at a higher rate unnecessarily. And from no statistical data, but just pure conversation with the citizens that I police and I'm responsible for on a regular basis in the community meetings that I have, we've seen that policing has improved in my specific area of command, which is Hispanic, majority African American. And we've seen that by understanding that officers and individuals have biases, that we're able to identify and work within those biases. So as a team lead, we would be able to instill and help to craft and put in place a program that would help benefit the Baltimore Police Department. And Michelle?
For whatever time is left, my experience working on this issue has dealt specifically with what Captain Plummer was just saying about police biases, especially with the immigrant community in Frederick and various places, and my representation on Fourth Amendment issues, on Fourth Amendment violation issues that have stemmed from those biased police procedures.
Thank you, Powers Group. Exeter.
Good evening. My name is Tracy Mears. I'm a law professor at Yale University, and I'm going to be a subject matter expert on this issue, along with community policing and use of force and interactions with youth. Our team actually has very deep and wide experience on identifying and working to address issues of bias in policing. For example, Commissioner Ramsey, whom you just met, worked in Philadelphia to both reduce crime and address bias in policing. One of our team members, Ron Davis, directed community policing for the Department of Justice under the Obama administration. For my own part, in my 2-decade career as a law professor, I focused my research on the best ways to address violence in primarily disadvantaged communities, often communities of color, by analyzing and assessing how individuals and people in neighborhoods come to conclusions about the fairness of legal authorities. I was one of the earliest folks to use procedural justice in my own research 20 years ago, which has now become a watchword in this issue. In my work in Stop and Frisk in New York, I've demonstrated that perceptions of bias in policing are intimately related to how people think about the trust in legal authorities. So it's not enough simply to quantitatively and qualitatively address disparities in race in policing, which I've done in my own work, but it's also important to connect those to how people actually assess trust and think about those relationships with their agencies. As far as examples of addressing that in work, I've served on the President's Task Force, President Obama's Task Force on 21st Century Policing, where we provided 59 recommendations, providing the gold standard in this area. And I've also worked with departments across the country to develop a 3-day procedural justice and impartial policing curriculum that has been used in cities across the country.
Thank you, Exeter. For the next question, we'll start with the Powers Group.
Excuse me.
Oh, I'm sorry. I forgot we were looping around.
Well,
CNA.
Again,
response.
CNA, has conducted collaborative reforms in over 250 police departments across the country, and more specifically in the area of bias policing. If you only look at the Las Vegas initiative in which CNA was involved in which it was clearly identified that there was racial disparity in the uses of force as well as police shootings. Based on that, CNA has worked with the Las Vegas Police Department, has brought about significant reform in its investigation, in its training, and other opportunities to help reduce the instances of bias within the police department as it relates to shootings. Me personally, I've been involved in an initiative in Mississippi whereby a police department was cited in reference to being unfair treatment to youth within schools. Young students being arrested for minor offenses. Many of those offenses were deemed to be misconduct type offenses, but working with the department, working with the school, we were able to develop an MOU that stated when and how police should interact with schools, interact with students, providing a policy change as relates to when officers should respond and the type of cases that they will be responsible for handling, as well as developing and identifying viable bias-free police training for the officers. All of those things coupled together will prove to be successful as it relates to reducing that type of bias.
Thank you, CNA. I promise to get it right next time. For the next question, we'll start with the Powers Group, and that question is around accountability. The consent decree includes a number of measures designed to increase the transparency of the systems designed to hold BPD officers accountable for misconduct and strengthen civilian oversight over BPD. What is your track record in enhancing civilian oversight over law enforcement agencies, and in what way are you prepared to overcome obstacles that may be posed by Maryland's Law Enforcement Officers' Bill of Rights or the collective bargaining agreement between the city and BPD?
My name is Len Lucci. I was the county attorney for Prince George's County. We are under a consent decree by the Department of Justice. We have a very robust citizen complaint oversight process that was made more robust after 10 years. We also have a very robust police union, but we found that the Law Enforcement Officers' Bill of Rights and the collective bargaining agreement were not insurmountable obstacles because we had very strong supervision thanks to the consent decree with very strong accountability measures and very comprehensive training. And that, because of that, we did not find it to be an insurmountable obstacle.
And as the CNA mentioned, they came in and they assisted Las Vegas Metro with the reform process. And one of those things was the oversight when it came to a critical instance when an officer used deadly force. And part of that reform process included adding citizens to the use of force board that actually reviewed and went out to scenes where officers were involved in deadly force incidents. And providing citizens that type of interaction in first-hand look at what occurred at an officer-involved shooting gave the citizens a deeper insight as to what actually occurs on there. And it provided that transparency component for the citizens, as well as the process that we put in place when we were involved in a shooting or a critical incident. We were pushing a message out to the media instantaneously. Within an hour, there was something pushed out as to what occurred, as much information, and then within 72 hours, we had a response from our undersheriff or sheriff. The other parts of the accountability process and transparency are the fact that everything is placed on our website where everyone can review every officer-involved shooting and the details of that. So part of the reform process that we went through in Las Vegas that I would be looking for here in Baltimore is including the community to be part of that reform process, getting their input and insight. And as a bureau commander in the area where I'm at now, we started a program, there's a program started called Safe Village Initiative, where every Monday we meet with the community members and they talk to us about the problems that are going on in their area. Thank you.
Exeter?
My name is Matthew Barge. I'm the monitor of a consent decree in Cleveland, Ohio, and the deputy monitor of a consent decree in Seattle. And in those cities, I think as in Baltimore, those monitoring teams' view and this monitoring team's view is that expansive community participation is necessary, not just engagement, but community participation is necessary to transform the relationship between law enforcement and the community. And that includes includes active, inclusive, and enduring civilian oversight. Our team has a track record of working on these issues in other places. In Cleveland, we're setting up a civilian agency to investigate complaints about police conduct. There will be a new inspector general to oversee the activities of the police department there. In Seattle, there's a community police commission that's created to be a conduit between the diverse communities and the reform process. So when you look across our team, there are folks in many jurisdictions, including Philadelphia and DC as well, where we have worked directly on establishing and strengthening civilian oversight. With respect to investigations of officer misconduct, when I go out and ride along, as I frequently do with police officers, and you get them one-on-one, not in large groups, but one-on-one, and you ask them when it comes to the disciplinary process, internal investigations, what do you think? What do you want to see? Uniformly, they say, I want fair and objective and thorough investigations, and I want assurance up front that that's going to be the case. When I ask civilians across communities, what do you want to see happen with respect to these internal investigations? They say we want them to be fair and thorough and objective and get to the bottom of what happened. That is a starting point in terms of shared values. Civilians, residents, and police officers may differ with respect to the details, but at the end of the day, the goal and the values are the same, and there's common ground that our team will work from.
Thank you, Exeter.
Thank you.
CNA?
CNA, again, has been deeply involved in enhancing civilian oversight within police department for years. You only look to, again, Las Vegas, whereby we helped to establish the Las Vegas Police Department Citizen Advisory Group, whereby you now have more citizens that actually sit on the use of force police shooting board than police officers themselves. In the city of Philadelphia, through technical assistance, enabling them to establish their police advisory commission, who now have voting rights as it relates to oversight, as it relates to police shootings. Our monitoring team includes Mr. Brian Core, who's a board member of the National Association of Civilian Oversight of Law Enforcement, who's one of our subject matter experts that will be assisting us in this endeavor. So again, as I started off earlier, in order for this consent decree to really take hold and to be successful, it must have citizen engagement, and not just passive engagement, but exact engagement, and believing that there is a need for them to be a part of the civilian oversight of police department is something that I believe we all recognize, and I believe is something that is spelled out within the consent decree itself.
Thank you, CNA. Venable?
Good evening. My name is Bob Stewart. I'm a police practices expert. I've been a monitor in 2 consent decrees and 1 settlement agreement. I look at civilian oversight as a part of a continuum that includes citizen participation in a number of processes called for in the consent decree. In addition to helping to write policy and training materials, that all of these are engagements and partnership activities where we must collaborate. So when I became a police chief, I inherited a police department that was under investigation by the Department of Justice, and I thought that the only way that we could regain the trust from the public was to initiate a citizen review board, which I did. So we passed an ordinance and created a review board and basically opened the doors and allowed people to look in and look at our investigation process. In terms of obstacles, I don't look at the nature of this as seeing obstacles, but I think that we have to work collaboratively and say, what's possible? What can we do? And we then work together to find what is a good fit for Baltimore.
Thank you, Venable. The next question that we have, we'll start with Exeter. That question is around community engagement. Beyond reports, data collection, and community meetings, how will your designated community liaison interact regularly with Baltimore residents? How does your team plan to involve and engage the community in a way that accounts for the uniqueness of the challenges Baltimore faces, including reaching people most impacted by BPD's law enforcement activities? How will your team ensure transparency into your activities and community influence on the reform process?
Hello, my name is Jessica Drake. I'm a Baltimore resident and a longtime community organizer in Baltimore, but now I work nationally and was part of the President's Task Force on 21st Century Policing as the logistics manager and facilitator. My role for this organization will be to serve as the Monitoring Team Advisory Board liaison. I have already worked extensively to begin compiling community leaders in Baltimore who are interested in serving as representatives for a broader base of individuals in their community. We're looking for a team of advisors who will help us reach large constituencies of people because we believe that that's the first step in hearing a broad voice from the community. But we know we can't do this without active community engagement. So our second plan, beyond the formal Monitoring Team Advisory Board, is to meet the community where we are. We will go to organizations such as the Patrick Allison House and have meetings with individuals who are returning citizens. We'll work with the school system to generate youth groups that we can speak to and talk to about their needs in the community. We can't expect the community to come into our space and tell us what they need. We have to be among the community. So our goal with the advisory board is to find representatives that you nominate to serve with us, as well as host a number of conversations outside in the community. Yes, we will be surveying as much as we can and putting that up publicly on our website so that anyone interested in hearing what the community feedback is can see it in real time. We'll also be using more basic systems, community boards. We'll use the Enoch Pratt Library system as a way for us to market events that the community might be interested in coming to in order to provide us feedback. We want this to be open access. The communities of Baltimore are vast, different, and all of great value to us. We need to hear from everyone that lives in this city, no matter what their background is, what street they live on, what school they went to, or how long they've lived here.
CNA?
Yes, again, my name is Dr. Johnny Rice II, and I want to state that Coppin State University, part of our mission is engagement and community-based outreach. We have a team of faculty as well as researchers that are involved in a myriad of community-based efforts today. And one of the things that's important to note is that getting community involvement is only achieved through transparency and through trust, and that can't happen overnight. So we hope to engage and identify organizations and residents that can be a part of our community council so they can have a voice in the process. These will be paid positions, and we also look to have students that can also support this respective effort. We have community organizations that have a proven track record of supporting a myriad of areas such as community collaboration, partnership building, but I think most important is reciprocity. And so we're going to establish an office so that there's opportunities for our team to interact with residents so we can hear what their concerns are, and we can take those concerns to account. That's very important because the community today feels like, in many instances, that it does not have a voice. So home visits, going to community associations, going to cultural events, leaving no stone unturned and meeting people where they're at, be it a senior in her home, be it going to a group home environment, or even, as someone else said, returning citizens that are coming home. That's important. And lastly, our campus is a resource as a convener, as a place where people can come and feel safe and share their thoughts about policing without feeling threatened, but it's also an environment where we can build and collaborate with others.
Good evening. My name is Seth Rosenthal. I'm a law partner of Ken Thompson's at Venable and a longtime civil rights attorney. We recognize how important community engagement is to the success of the monitorship. Without knowing what the community thinks, it's impossible to know whether the reforms that the consent decree mandates are actually taking hold. In this situation, the perception of reform is the reality of reform. This question asks for specifics about what we're going to do to reach out to the community to make sure that the voices in the community, all the voices in the community, are heard. And what we're going to do, some of it is actually required by the consent decree, like the question suggests. Community surveys, where we formulaically assess what the community believes, and quarterly community meetings that we're required to have, which will include telling the community what's in our reports. But beyond that, we too plan to go out to the community where it is, to go to people where they are, to establish relationships with communities, to get invitations to community meetings so that we can hear at those more formal meetings what certain community groups think in every corner of the city, to reach out to community leaders as well, sit down, have coffee with them, have breakfast with them, find out what exactly they're thinking. And importantly, rather than simply having these informal meetings or attending these meetings of community groups, document those things, that input that we're getting from the community in the exact same way that we're documenting every other thing that we'd be doing under the consent decree, whether it is the data we are collecting with respect to stops and searches, the data we are collecting with respect to use of force, training, policies. All of that stuff all that stuff will be treated exactly the same as our interactions with the community, so that when we write our reports and when we are transparent with the community, you can know exactly what it is we have been hearing from the community and whether or not the reforms required by the consent decree are taking hold. In addition to that, in addition to reaching out to the community to make sure that we're
Thank you, Venable.
Sure, thank you.
Powers Group.
Thank you. We have a number of people on our team who have been involved in monitoring teams and that monitoring process, but we said when we put this team together, we didn't want them to be involved in any other monitoring process or any other teams because Baltimore is a unique situation. It's a city in crisis, and we needed their full concentration here. As monitor of this team and part of the community liaison, when I walk out my door in the morning, I will be accessible to the public. They will see me at the store, at the market. We will certainly be in community forums. We're setting up satellite offices on the east side, on the west side, north side, and south side of Baltimore because we know transportation is an issue. We will be listening to people on a regular basis. We won't be coming in quarterly to update you on where we are. We will be here daily. We will be in community meetings daily. And I said, when I walk out the door in the morning, you will have access to your monitor in Baltimore City, not in any other city, not traveling around, but right here. Michelle?
And I live on Druid Hill Avenue. That's the same street where Thurgood Marshall grew up. And it's important that I share that because where we live in Baltimore really dictates how we're going to get the community to engage. Each neighborhood, as everybody here in this room knows, is very different, and that is very unique perhaps to Baltimore, but that's also going to be a helpful challenge and helpful realization for all of us to go into it together. But first and foremost is knowing how each community differs from one another, I mean neighborhoods, and asking them how they want to engage and seeing how they're already engaging in their communities.
Thank you, Powers Group. And the last question for this portion of the forum is going to go to CNA to start.
When you talk about diversion...
That question is around diversion. I'd like to read it.
No. When you talk... You want to read the question? Oh.
Please explain your team's experience in creating and implementing policies and programs that reduce interaction of vulnerable persons with police, and what assistance you can provide to the city and BPD to divert people from police involvement.
Okay.
Thank you.
Again, you know, when you start talking about opportunities and where do you reach out to provide those opportunities, you know, our youth are one of the most critical elements that those opportunities need to be afforded. CNA has done extensive work around the country and not only helping to institute, but actually developing diversion programs itself. Dr. James Cauldron, who's here, helped develop the Illinois project that focused on steering young people away from the criminal justice system by providing various opportunities and collaborative methods for them to receive skill building in order to lead them away from the criminal justice system. In Charlotte, we developed a diversion program for our youth. North Carolina is only one of 2 states that consider a 16 and 17-year-old as an adult. And with that, we were seeing a number of young, primarily African-American males, 16 and 17 years old, with permanent criminal records. We instituted a diversion program that diverted many of those youth out of the criminal justice system, provided job skills training, mentoring, tutoring services for them, and if they stayed active in that program for 1 year, those charges will be totally exonerated from their particular record. And to date, we've had less than a 15% recidivism of any of those young teens that we've had in the program. So we're committed to bringing those efforts, identifying other efforts that will help support the Baltimore youth and diverting them out of the criminal justice system.
Thank you, CNA. Venable?
I'm Dr. Randy DuPont. I'm a clinical psychologist and a professor at the University of Memphis. I was fortunate enough to be named by the National Alliance on Mental Illness as their Person of the Year for making the changes that I have helped made in the police interaction with those that have mental illness, as well as those that have a whole range of, struggling with a whole range of disabilities. One thing I've been pleased about is that the team that I'm working with, I've actually worked with them locally in their own areas to implement 3 or 4 of the programs that we have that we think make a difference in the life and the quality for those individuals who are struggling, particularly with disabilities of a wide range. I think one of the things I think that's important to emphasize is that this program is very much one that works hand in hand with what this community is looking for and with what the consent decree is asking for. It looks for community involvement at a meaningful level that really does have a direct impact on what happens on the streets. Secondly, it looks for the fact that a policy comes out of that community involvement that really does change things and makes a difference. Third, the emphasis is on a great deal of de-escalation training. We were one of the first ones to emphasize this, and we started our program in the 90s. It's indeed a very impactful thing, and we have good data to show that it reduces use of force and reduces arrests, particularly with those that are part of vulnerable populations indeed. The last thing we look for indeed, though, is outcome research to show that this is really working and making a difference. I think if we have a chance here, we'll find that indeed, as in other cities, we can make a difference in Baltimore as well.
Thank you, Venable. Powers Group?
Good evening. My name is Neil Franklin. I'm a retired major from the Maryland State Police and a Baltimore resident. We have team members who are very familiar with pre-arrest diversion programs all across the nation, from Hearst, Texas to Fairfax County, Virginia, where Sheriff Stacey Kincaid is. The importance of pre-arrest diversion is diverting someone, one of our vulnerable citizens, away from arrest. We don't want them in our criminal justice system, period. They need mental health attention. And one other thing we have to recognize is that more times than not, mental health is coupled with substance abuse. We have an addiction problem here in Baltimore. We've already begun here in Baltimore the Law Enforcement Assisted Diversion Program, which was recommended to the department 3 years ago, but they finally got it up and running under this administration. That's extremely important. Critical incident training is also important, and we have a number of team members who are very familiar with that and dealing with our vulnerable population. And one of those is our doctor right here.
Good evening. My name is Dr. Annette Douglas. I'm a behavioral scientist, and I've worked with the different departments around the country: New York City Police Department, Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office, involving the diversion programs. The program that you have here in Baltimore, the LEAD program that my counterpart just spoke of, is a new program here to Baltimore. And as a monitor, what we'd like to do is to review the policy that's in place to, with our expertise and our background, ensure that the policy is covering the aspects of the community involvement. That secondly is to be sure that there is total community engagement.
Exeter?
Good evening. My name is Hassan Aden. I'm a retired chief of police. The last department was Greenville, North Carolina. I currently am working in Seattle and in Cleveland on their monitoring teams. You know, when you think about diversion programs, a lot of people tend to put them in certain buckets. You know, it's either this program or that program. I want to just talk about that very quickly but in a different context, in the context of every police contact has the opportunity for a diversion. The officers need to have tools to do that. They need to be supported within the police department to do that in terms of their performance measures, and de-emphasizing arrest as a good, as what makes a good officer. Our team has experience turning around police departments that didn't previously have those qualities or those tools. I want to talk a little bit about, and it was mentioned about the differences between criminal justice system diversion programs and ones that are dealt with through the courts. Pre is obviously, when you're dealing with vulnerable populations, the preferred method, because it allows them to continue and potentially have a productive life in their communities. Post, obviously, there is some legislation that mandates having it, through the courts. But what we have experience doing is working with youth, with vulnerable populations in multiple communities across the country. We have a system to do that. We know exactly where to look, what policies, training that needs to occur, and the culture of the department actually has to shift to embrace that. Policing.
You exit your group. Thank you. Thank you all for your responses to the pre-submitted questions. We're about to transition to the second portion of our forum. As we transition to the second half, we're going to ask all of the monitor teams that are on the stage, with the exception of CNA, to exit to my right. There's reserved seating in the front. We'll ask those members that are members of CNA to either enter the stage from behind stage or from my left. Audience members, as we wait for the teams to transition, if you have questions, we'll ask you to raise your hand and wait for the microphone to come to you before participation so that everyone can hear your question. To allow for maximum participation, we're going to limit the asking of the questions to 1 minute per person, and we'll also limit the number of questions to 1 per person unless there is additional time. We'll start with taking a person from the right section in the auditorium first, then we'll move to the middle section, and then we'll move to the left, and then we'll repeat. If you have a question for a particular monitor candidate that doesn't get answered during their allotted 20-minute response time, remember that you'll also have time toward the end of the forum for direct engagement with the monitor candidates. Erica Bridgeford will be serving as my co-moderator for this portion of the forum. Erica?
So a piece of what we're also going to be doing, if in your 1 minute you are not just asking a question, you're also giving your opinion about something or venting some about something, I'm going to work on understanding what you're saying, try to make sure you feel heard and understood. We're going to grab what we call values out of what you're saying. So what in there is important to you? Shantae is going to be posting those values so that as an audience and as the monitors, everybody can get a look at what seem to be common values that people in this conversation today have. And then I'll also be checking in to let you know how many more seconds you have in your minute to see if you do have an actual question somewhere in there. So that's what's, just so you know. Okay, so we'll be starting over here.
Good evening. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to ask my question. I guess this is for all the potential monitors. In the questionnaire that came out, there was a question about having someone on your team that had expertise in the prison, the pipeline. And I was just wondering, what is your thoughts on that? Or what is your thoughts? Who's the person that's been identified to work on that portion of the consent decree? I'd just like to hear what you have to say. You can't hear me? Prison to pipeline.
So the question is, who on your team will be working on the school to prison pipeline issues? Is that what the question is?
So good evening. My name is Chip Coldren. I'm
Managing Director for Justice Programs at CNA. My past experience includes the co-writing of the legislation and the implementation of a program in Illinois called Redeploy Illinois. And the specific goal of Redeploy Illinois was to build community-based resources so that you would not have to send youth to detention and prison. That program is on the web. It's been evaluated. It's been very successful with no increase in youth crime in the communities that we worked. I also have a fair amount of experience implementing restorative justice with schools and police departments in Illinois. So if there's work to be done in the school-to-prison pipeline, I'll probably be leading that charge.
Okay, who's next answering? Cessa? Oh, sorry. Okay, in the middle. Do I see any hands in the middle? We're moving. Lamontre, we're moving. Lamontre, we're moving here. So what's happening is we're going here, and then there, and then to the overflow in the back if there's anybody, and then back here. So we'll be back over there in a minute.
Hi, I want to ask you what ideas in terms of policies or procedures that you would have, you would think of putting in place to deal with officers who know of other officers committing wrongdoing, collusion, hiding it, and protection for officers that are willing to come forth.
Yes, thank you. My name is Dan Giaquinto. I'm proposed as the Deputy Monitor. I currently serve as the Deputy Monitor of the Independent Monitoring Team for the Settlement Agreement in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and also serve as an Independent Internal Affairs Investigator in Maricopa County, Arizona. Prior to that, I dealt with the consent decree on behalf of the state of New Jersey with the New Jersey State Police when they were under a consent decree for racial profiling. So internal affairs is sort of my background in the monitoring process, along with Fourth Amendment issues and constitutional issues. What you talk about is very important. I'm assuming it's a policy, and if it's not, it has to become a policy, and in fact, it has to become a policy violation if an officer is aware of wrongdoing by another officer and fails to report it. That has to be reemphasized, it has to be in policy, it has to be in training, and most importantly, it has to be part of accountability. So if you have a situation where there was wrongdoing and somebody else was aware of it, it has to be reported. If they fail to report it, then it has to be investigated and appropriate discipline imposed, depending on the situation. So it is very important. And the second part of your question was, I didn't... Correct. And I'm assuming this is part of their policy now, and if not, it will become part of their policy once a monitoring team is selected, is that you have to have a non-retaliation policy, and it has to be strictly enforced. I've seen it in my work in internal affairs in the past, in my experience in the monitoring process. I also served as the state's attorney, or what we call county prosecutor in New Jersey for Mercer County, New Jersey, where I was the hearing officer for the detectives assigned to my prosecutor's office in disciplinary matters. You can't have any sort of retaliation. It's got to be outlawed, okay? And it's got to be, if there's any complaint of it, it's got to be investigated. On the hierarchy of internal affairs violation, it has to be in the matrix where there is substantial punishment for retaliation. It has to be investigated thoroughly, and appropriate discipline must be administered if there's found to be a violation. So yes, that's the administrative protection, and there's other protections also that are out there in terms of civil law and even criminal law. But administratively, and by administratively I mean the internal affairs process, it has to be part of the policies of the police organization, and it has to be dealt with equitably but seriously.
You know, there's one thing I'd like to add to that. I'm currently working with the Atlanta Police Department in capturing their 21st century policing initiatives. And one of the things that I've observed with the Atlanta Police Department is every recruit that comes to the academy, it goes through a regimen of use of force training. And one of the scenarios that they use is an officer that's hyped up responding to a particular incident with a partner, and that partner goes off the rails and starts abusing an individual. Then the scenario is not stopped until that other officer intervenes and causes it to stop. And once it's stopped, both officers are then sent to a room to document what it is that they just observed and what they just experienced. So not only does it have to be embedded in policy, but it has to be trained. An officer has to be able to see and know what is right and what is their rightful responsibility in identifying and bringing forth those issues and incidents of wrongdoing.
Next question will come from this section.
Yes, thank you. I'm talking fast. I'm trying to get my statement and my question in at the same time. The whole thing with the DOJ and the consent decree is based upon the injustices in reference to the black communities and the police departments around the country. I know so far, I think it's like 20-something consent decrees that have been given, and only one of them has been given to one black company. Now, just in my opinion, I guess I have to ask all of y'all, do you think that's fair? Do you think that since this consent decree and all this have come out the black communities, don't you think that black companies should have a better portion of the process as opposed to just being a part of somebody's team and not being the owner of the firm?
So a few things in there. It sounds like follow through around your understanding of what was found in the DOJ's report as it relates to police involvement with the black community specifically. You would like to see not just follow through, but the leadership in whoever the monitoring team that there's black leadership in that team, not just a member, but also an owner. Is that right? And you're looking, for you, that's about fairness.
How many black companies have gotten this contract so far out of the 24, 25 that's been given?
We don't know those answer to that.
You said you don't know the answer to that?
I said we don't have.
You don't have an answer to that.
We don't have the answer to that as it relates to minorities.
Oh, so you were making a statement. It was a rhetorical question. Okay, so you were saying that there's one monitor that has black leadership. Is there a question that you have in there? That was the question. So, okay. Okay. All right. Is there anybody, was there anybody from the overflow? Or is it just going back this way? Okay. Yep.
Good evening. I have a question in reference to mental health issues. Now, we know that in this city, that is a big issue. And so far, I think I've seen or heard one organization, one company that has somebody that is directly connected to mental health behavior. And for the rest of the companies up there, you connected with anyone that's pertaining to mental health? Or how many organizations? I'm sorry.
Can you repeat the question part? So I grabbed that mental health is important to you as it relates to the monitor's expertise.
That's correct.
What was your question?
Actually, the question is for the rest of the organizations up there or companies. Do you have a staff or anyone that has a degree in mental health or connected to organization mental health service?
The ability to really address mental health issues with expertise, it sounds like. That's your question for them, okay?
I'd like to speak to that, but it kind of takes me to the question that this gentleman had previously. Coppin State University is a historically black college and university, is committed to ensuring that the voice of the black community is heard in this process. And even though we are not the company, as that gentleman said, that is leading this effort, I believe that the faculty who are researchers and practitioners, individuals that have deep roots here in Baltimore and communities beyond, do have a sensitivity to the needs of those communities where there's been disproportionate use of force. In terms of what our specific expertise is in mental health, We have our dean of our college of behavioral and social sciences, Dr. Beverly O'Brien, who's a part of our outreach and research effort. And Dean O'Brien has served in national roles in organizations that focus on counseling and mental health. So we would bring, as a university, not just myself as the liaison, but we would bring all of those resources, our students, the Black experience to the process, and ensure that those communities that feel as though they haven't had a voice do have a voice.
I should also add that a member of our team is Dr. Laura Kennard, who recently helped the Bureau of Justice Assistance develop the revised crisis intervention training curriculum. So we have mental health expertise on our team as well.
Okay. All right, next question from the middle.
I want to, the first thing I want to do is I want to make a statement, and that is that you do not have to train a human being not to kick somebody in the teeth when they're down in handcuffs. So I get tired of hearing about this training. You do not have to train somebody not to kick or shoot somebody with their hands up. No amount of training is going to take that person and convince them, oh, if I trained you, because I just want to make that statement. The second thing is I wanted to say is, what do you plan to do when you have a state's attorney that's bold enough to prosecute an officer for wrongdoings, and then you turn around and have the Fraternal Order of Police and have the police force come after that person? I can speak, for myself. I'm more interested in how do you plan to prosecute these people for wrongdoings. Clearly, we can see the videotapes, we can see it viral, but none of them get prosecuted. I'm interested in how you plan to prosecute them, how you plan to push that and make sure that they held accountable. And most of the people in the community where I come from, that's what they're concerned about. They keep getting away with it, and we're sick of it.
So a few things in there. I think I got what your question is, but you can help me if I missed it. But the pieces in there that you were expressing, it sounded like that you feel doubtful about what training is going to do, that humanity is important to you, that people, that you can't train someone to just honor people's humanity, it sounds like you're saying. Okay, and so that was Okay, and so that was the second piece, that follow through and prosecution is important to you, when in your perception there is evidence that you like to see follow through with that prosecution and protection around how the prosecution is able to go through the end of it. So transparency and accountability too were in there for you. So so this is the last question for this panel, just so everybody is clear. And so the question in there for you was about how would this team make sure that there was that accountability and transparency in the way prosecution happens. Okay.
I think the answer has to start with the expectations and a clear understanding of the monitoring process, which time does not permit today. But that is a very essential task for the monitoring team, whichever team is selected, is to make sure the community knows the monitoring process and understands it. We do not prosecute. We do not have oversight over the state's attorney's office. A decision to criminally prosecute someone comes from the state's attorney. Does not come from the monitoring team, nor do we have oversight over that office. What we will have oversight over, is the police function, investigations, and accountability, meaning internal affairs. That we will have oversight over. Please understand, everybody has to understand this. The monitoring team does not have command authority over the Baltimore Police Department. We cannot come in and give orders and suddenly change things. We change things through monitoring, through technical assistance, and through commenting publicly and reporting to the court on the progress or lack of progress of the Baltimore Police Department in carrying out the reforms of the consent decree. That's basically, our authority in all this. In terms of the lawsuit against the state's attorney, that is something that's currently in front of the Fourth Circuit on appeal, I believe, was the last I read of it. You have to understand that the monitoring team is an extension of the court. We are subject to judicial ethics, and for something like that, we would not be able to comment on it while it is a matter for the courts. So I'm sorry to disappoint you, but we do not have the authority to order prosecutions or to monitor the decision of a state's attorney whether to prosecute or not. We do have authority to monitor the police department, to make sure their investigations are sound, and to make sure that administrative discipline is appropriately carried out.
Thank you, CNA.
And we do, however, encourage, obviously, good working relationships between a police department
Thank you, CNA.
and a prosecutor's office. It's extremely important for justice to be
CNA,
carried
your time
out.
is up. Thank you. At this point, we're going to ask those members of the CNA candidate group to exit the stage to my right, and we'll ask Venable to come up to my left.
Okay, once everyone's seated, the next question is gonna come from, where was she sitting, right? She's right here, so we're gonna be there next. Anyone in that section? Got somebody in the back right there.
Good evening. Good evening. While in Detroit on a similar assignment, this is more so a question statement, you all ran into ethical issue, and my question was, are you all and wasn't you all under investigation for unethical behavior while in Detroit on a similar assignment? Because if so, that's a distraction here, and also a distraction there, and that's the last thing we need in this city.
Can you repeat that? We couldn't hear that.
So the question was this particular team under investigation?
Right, so the Venable when they were on similar assignment in Detroit, it was a investigation going on with one of the team members where they was accused of unethical behavior with the former mayor. So that is considered a distraction in my eye, and also I want to know, and if you all still are under investigation, I think you all should remove yourself because that's a distraction. That's the last thing we need. Second of all, can you speak to that investigation?
Right. So, so the pieces in there, the values you expressed were about ethics and integrity. And so your question, you want to know, were they under investigation, if they're still under investigation, and if so, will they remove themselves?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Thank you.
Let me answer the question. It's an easy question. We are not under investigation. No one on this team is under investigation. So hopefully that'll answer your question. No, our team has never been under investigation. Absolutely.
Was your firm?
I'm certain of that as well. But my firm has never been under investigation.
So wait for the microphone to come around to you. I know that people are really eager to get pieces of this answer. It sounds like honesty and transparency is really important to the audience around this answer. But we're coming over here for the next question.
Coming from the human and social sciences industry, I am a believer at this time that no amount of training will change the tactics and pattern and practice of Baltimore City Police Department. So with that being said, what type of recommendations would your team implement to make sure to protect the cultural representation of Baltimore City, and as well as use proactive ways to create social reform within Baltimore City Police Department and Patterson practice?
So you're feeling doubtful about what training can do for the police department here in Baltimore City. Also, that protection of Baltimore's cultural representation is important to you. And you have questions about how this team would protect the cultural representation. Is that right? What was the
Yes, and
specific question?
How would they protect the cultural representation of Baltimore City, as well as change the social dynamics of the police department when it comes to demilitarizing and making the police department a more community and social-based organization?
So that community piece is really important to you, okay?
Okay. Yeah, thank you very much. First of all, I'm glad to hear you're in the social science field. Congratulations, and I hope you stay with that. That's excellent. The other thing I'd like to add is that when we are encouraged to look at the outcome data, that indeed you can have an impact. And I agree, it's not just about training. It is about what you're saying. It's also about culture change, respect for others. It's about a whole range of things. If one tackles only one part and looks just at training, I think they do miss the boat and they don't really understand what needs to be done. So I think that what we look at is a whole range of changes. We're looking for an involvement of the community in the development of policy, in the training itself. We're looking for officers to have time and exposure to individuals who are struggling with the same issues that you're bringing up and that others are bringing up here today. Those things are very critical. If we do all that, we have found that officers do indeed start showing a leadership to younger officers and mentor them to make a difference so they do have the respect that you're looking for, and then they can make a difference in the quality and the life of your city.
If I could add, you know, the training is only one part of a four-part process: policy, training, supervision, and discipline. They all have to work for reform and culture change to take place. So what really happens in a consent decree process, first and foremost, is the life of the supervisors change more dramatically than anybody else. But it's the command staff who has to make people accountable. And our role is that all of the elements that are necessary are in that consent decree, and our job is to make sure that the department adheres to all of them.
I'll make one comment that I think refers to part of your question. You've heard a lot of references this evening to President Obama's task force on 21st century policing. Many of the people here in the audience have participated on the task force. Some of us testified before. One of the key issues that came out of the task force was the notion of police looking at themselves as guardians of a safer community versus a warrior. That kind of distinction. Guardian versus warriors. And that's something that community policing and a lot of the things that we've talked about this evening, community engagement, all moves in that direction. The police begin, not just the officer on the street, but the entire organization, as you see, begins, a culture change begins that Randy referred to. But as that culture change begins, the officers begin to see themselves differently and start to interact differently. But you need the community input in that as well. So the police and the community together are guardians to keep it safe.
Okay, next question from the middle.
Hi, David Prater with Disability Rights Maryland. I had a question about Venable's decision to not have a formal community advisory panel or community council to assist in its community engagement process. Some of the other applicants did, and I'd like to hear why Venable made the decision not to have a similar panel in its proposal for community engagement.
Did you
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, yeah. Again, Seth Rosenthal, proposed deputy
He
monitor.
got right to the question, so.
Deputy monitor, thanks for the question. It's something that we considered, and at the end of the day, what we thought is, look, we do not want to create a hierarchy of people within the community to whom we're going to listen. And our concern was that creating a community advisory board like that might do something like that. We're not saying it necessarily would, but our concern is that it would create that kind of hierarchy and potentially make people feel as though they were being left out of the process, being left out of being heard. We want to make sure that everybody is heard. We want to have an open door policy and an open outreach policy where we are not hand selecting people within the community, potentially to the exclusion of others. So that's why we decided not to formalize this community advisory committee. That said, we do fully intend on having what I would call an informal community advisory committee by reaching out to a number of different organizations and a number of different leaders in the community to obtain their input, which will ultimately inform our view about whether the police department is achieving the reforms contemplated by the consent decree.
The next question is coming from this section over here. We'll circle back around, but we're going this, here, and there's one question per person. So we want to make sure we're able to maximize time and give as many people a chance as we can. So there's nobody in this section who has a question? Huh? Okay, we're grabbing somebody from over here.
Hi, my name is Lee, and while I agree that we do need a panel to help establish the consent decree, I'm concerned with an old guard feeling amongst the panel. I feel like it's going to be the same old, same old. I feel like a panel will be instituted to bring forth the decree, but I feel like community residents won't have full involvement in the decree being laid out or implemented. And I'm just concerned about cronyism, you know, and really no change, just lip service to the community of Baltimore. We deserve better. We deserve streets free of crime, and it's not that hard. You know, we know what the answer is. It's just, is there a unbiased group of law enforcement people willing to bring forth the change?
So I'm not sure that I didn't hear a question in there, but I want to make sure I got what you were saying. You feel worried about old ways coming through. You're looking for really fresh and new ideas, and also community inclusion in what happens. Did you have a specific question you wanted to ask this team?
I just wanted to make sure that it just wasn't cronyism. You know what I mean? Like, for example, not to insult people from the Baltimore area and law enforcement.
I'm going to pause you real quick because you probably only have like 10 seconds left to ask a question.
Mm-hmm.
So if I'm hearing you say you don't really have a question, but you want to put them on notice about community involvement and having fresh ways of doing things, and not just having old boy ways come into this new way of the way things need to be done.
Right, fresh leadership.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we're coming back to this section.
Hi. So I have two questions. My first question is, could each of the individuals...
I'm going to pause you real quick. You get one question.
One question. All right.
Because, I mean, we got a room full of people and we want to
be fair. Well, the most important question is for Mr. Ken. I see that your application talks about your experience with representing tobacco companies and oil companies, but there's no real indication around your experience with policing. And so could you share if you do have experience with policing?
Okay, that's right to it.
Yeah. I probably said this earlier, but I've been practicing law for 40 years, so I've represented lots of different clients. For the first 10 years of my practice, it was almost exclusively as a criminal defense lawyer, and I think I said that earlier. I've represented thousands of defendants in all the courts around the state, serious matters, misdemeanors, and I did that for 10 years. And so when I answered the question earlier today about bias of the team, I needed you to understand that I am not law enforcement, that in fact I have been a criminal defense lawyer, and that's in my blood, and of course I would do that now if someone hired me to do it.
So just real quick, we pulled practical experience and relevance out of that last question as things that were important there. Any other answers before we move on? Okay. From the middle section here.
Yeah, I got a question and a suggestion. Now, will there be one person picked as a monitor? Will one team picked as a monitor?
So your question is about the process.
I'm saying, when you pick is it going to be one monitor?
Yes.
The selection would be one monitoring team. We have a team.
Okay.
I will be the lead monitor, but of course we have experts to assist us in the different areas that need to be addressed in the consent decree.
Here was my suggestion, is that because of the dynamics of the city, there should be a north, south, east, and west. And I feel they should be from the city because they know the city and the dynamics of the city. If it's not like that,
Okay.
just wasting time.
Thank you. So in there, you want completeness covering the entire city. Okay? Thank you. Here, we're coming to my left. Anybody have a question from this section over here on my left?
This is actually somewhat reiterating a question that was given to the last team, but while the community engagement obviously is very important and other stakeholders have been involved, the state's attorney's office has been notably absent. And I'm wondering if you have any efforts or plans to try to engage them in the process.
So inclusion of the state's attorney's office.
Could you repeat the question for me? I couldn't quite hear.
So what are your plans to include and engage the state's attorney's office?
Okay. Talking about engaging the state's attorneys, just so you'll know, Seth Rosenthal and my name's Steve Parker. We're career federal prosecutors specializing in civil rights prosecution. So between us, we've prosecuted probably over 100 law enforcement officers for violating constitutional rights. We know what's a good case. We're going to be watching the BPD to make sure they're investigating it properly, and they're also referring it to the state attorney's office. And it's going to be in our reports what's going over. It's going to be transparent, and while we can't order the state's attorney around, it's at least everybody's going to know what they're getting and whether they're going to prosecute it or not.
Okay. Thank you. We're coming back over here to my right.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening. I'm Ray Kelly, and I've heard all the teams talk about their commitment to community engagement. So my question is, the No Boundaries Coalition and the West Baltimore Community Commission on Police Misconduct, as well as many other organizations, will continue to interview residents and formally document and report progress from street level. What consideration will you give the perspective of the citizens identified in the DOJ findings, and how do you plan to leverage the input submitted by those directly impacted by past and future engagement with BPD when deciding compliance or completion?
Okay, so I'm going to grab, you asked two questions. I'm going to try to synthesize them, and you can let me know if I mess it up. So it sounds like you're proud of the work that you have done in the coalition, and also wanting to make sure that there's inclusion from those voices at the ground level who are most likely to be impacted with police engagement. And you want to know from this team, how will they honor those voices and include that knowledge and expertise from a ground level?
Right, and what I'm actually trying to get is commitment to continue to work with these grassroots organizations that have been doing this work for years, and ensure that it's not going to be a data collection model or...
So you're looking for continuous commitment to being engaged with the community at the ground level, not just getting data and walking away with the data.
Exactly. How do you plan to continue to make sure that the residents influence this process?
Influence the process, okay?
Thank you, Mr. Kelly. So I'd mentioned before when we were answering questions that we are going to take information from everybody to the extent that the No Boundaries Coalition is gathering up information and gathering up people who have stories to tell the monitoring team about their interactions with the Baltimore Police Department. That is exactly the type of information that, if we're fortunate enough to be selected as monitor, we'll be looking for. As I mentioned before, the perception of reform is the reality of reform here. And it's impossible to tell whether the reforms required by the consent decree are actually taking hold unless we know what people in the community think. If the No Boundaries Coalition and the people who are affiliated with it have information to provide to us, we will receive that information on an ongoing basis, and we will engage with the people affiliated with that coalition on an ongoing basis.
That's going to conclude the questions that we have at this point, or the time that we have at this point with Venable. We'll ask the Venable team to exit the stage to my right, and we'll ask the Powers group to enter the stage on my left.
Okay, yep. So we're going to take a question right here from the middle.
Hi, first I want to say I think it's very important that individuals of the police force are
aware that there are a lot of people in the community that are mentally ill. And so I'm glad that you guys are addressing mental illness, but I see here that you guys plan to use the approach of de-escalation and response to individuals suffering from mental illness. Could you tell me what that looks like?
So that awareness about mental illness in the community is important to you. Okay, so that's the piece we can go. Awareness is up there, okay.
What was the question now?
So the question was about, you have something in your materials about, what was it?
Well, de-escalation, and then I'll let someone else talk to the mental illness piece, because we've kind of comprised this team to cover every aspect, and it's a relatively large team so that we can cover every aspect of the city with our unique understanding of the city. De-escalation, and certainly as it concerns use of force, as we've discussed, which is a major part of the consent decree, involves training and making sure police officers de-escalate a situation before a deadly force or any kind of force even become necessary. For being willing to back down and back away when you believe that situation can be heightened and it doesn't necessarily dictate that it need to be heightened. So training police officers, monitoring that process, making sure that BPD has a process in place to have their officers understand mental illness for one thing, to de-escalate in those situations, and other situations that if you de-escalate before it comes to a use of any kind of force, that they understand how to do that. And we think that's important, and the monitoring process is important in the consent decree because use of force and excessive force was part of the issues discussed by DOJ, part of the issues agreed to be addressed in the consent decree for Baltimore City, so it will be a significant part of our monitoring process to make sure that that training is in place, that officers clearly understand that, and that we are engaging the community in the process of helping us understand the climate on the street, whether they are seeing those de-escalation issues addressed.
I'd like to address that a little bit because what the plan is to be sure to keep community involvement and community engaged in this, especially with mental illness. The program that we spoke of earlier that Baltimore has just begun, the LEAD program, is very much familiar to the programs that are going on nationwide in a various number of cities that are not as involved in the issues that you're currently having, but was very successful. And one, when we talked about training, we talk about training the officers, not only the officers, but as well as the community. Another aspect is that involved in the training would be, for instance, the 911 responders. What types of keywords will those 911 operators look for in trying to determine whether or not this is an issue regarding a mental illness, an issue that's regarding prostitution, an issue that's regarding drug addiction? And of course, with that, they put the call out to say, well, we have a domestic violence issue, for instance, where the person has just come out of Creedmoor institution. Then they know that to send that special team out to work with it as a response. To also have the mental health associations involved. It's important that the city remembers to coordinate and collaborate with the human services that are already here. Especially if we're going to continue to look at mental health as being a separate issue, meaning that it may not need to go to the types of courts that are currently in place for other types of crime, and so that your jails will not be filled with people who are suffering from mental illnesses, and your jails be filled with those who are substantially of correct mind. Of course, you know, when we put people into the jails with mental illness, they lose their services. And by the time they come out, they have no services and they have to start all over again. So if we use something like a mental health court, with that we'll be able to help those folks to go into the right type of treatment programs at the same time being reformed for the crime that they committed.
So let me tell you how we will monitor this. Baltimore Police Department has already implemented a training program, an educational program for critical incident training of their police officers. It was developed by PERF, the Police Executive Research Forum. So what we will do as a monitoring team is monitor the effectiveness of that program. We'll evaluate it, we'll see if the officers have been trained to the level they need to be trained, or should I say educated, in how to identify those who are dealing with mental health issues, de-escalate appropriately, handle it appropriately, divert away from incarceration appropriately, and hopefully in a favorable result for everyone involved. Last thing we want to do, if at all possible, is to send people into prison who are dealing with mental health issues.
Okay, next will be a question from my left. Anyone in that section have a question?
Yep. Hi, how are you guys today? I had a question about the community engagement. I think it's really important. I've been hearing a lot about how everybody wants to be in tune with community, but I think it is important understanding the Baltimore community, and as someone else stated, I like how you stated that you're going to address the North, the South, the East, and the West, but I also want to know if you know about the issues or concerns of some of the diverse communities, like the growing Latino community, immigrant population, some of their issues and concerns.
Yeah, I'm gonna let Michelle Mendez and John Hutchinson from Coppin State University answer that particular question. I will only say that this team was assembled because we understand all those communities and the importance of engaging with those communities, and we've already reached out to community organizations, and we've been already involved in that process even before we applied for a monitoring contract. This is a passion and a mission for us with all of our expertise, because we want to see the change in the city to dramatically reduce crime, but more importantly, increase life chances. So we assembled that team with the expertise required by the consent decree, but also with a unique connection and a desire to engage all of these groups who have already done so much work. They're part of the reason that we're here in the first place with a DOJ investigation and a consent decree are the people out there, not the people up here, and we understand that. John and Michelle. Go ahead, Michelle.
Yeah. So thank you for that question. I'll address the immigrant portion of the question. So I moved to Baltimore in 2005 to attend grad school, and I actually chose it in part because I knew I wanted to be an immigrants' rights attorney or a civil rights attorney if we ever had immigration reform or anything like that. Obviously, that's not in the works anymore. But I chose it because it had a burgeoning immigrant community. It also has a burgeoning refugee community, which you probably know. And I think the issues are similar in a way, although different, right? So they are similar in the sense that immigrants and refugees right now, given what we have right now in the political environment, they are unsure whether the police are their friends or the police are going to help deport them, right? And so there is a level of distrust there for different reasons, but the level of distrust, I think, is present, and it needs to be looked at in a very specific way. And I think that is something that Baltimore City Police has made some strides to do better as of late. But then also with the differences are that the reasons why they see the police as perhaps not being their friend are just totally different, because we don't have this history of bad relationships with and police misconduct in this city. The immigrants don't, right? It's mostly has been aimed at African Americans. So it's important to know those communities and what they're dealing with and how to go about building trust among refugee community, immigrant community, but there is still nonetheless some level of distrust. And so we are very mindful of that, and that is part of the reason that I wanted to be involved in this team and why I am involved in this team proudly, because we've recognized that even though the problems have a very deep roots in Baltimore as they go with the African American community and the police, we now have these other cultures and these other folks who are here, and we also need to take them into consideration, because if the police isn't working for one of them, you best believe they're not going to work for the others.
We also recognize that diversity is actually quite more than the color of one's skin. We really understand that there's socioeconomic diversity as well as religious diversity, and frankly, there's area diversity. That is the basis why we have our satellite offices, That's the basis why this team looks like this. The fact of the matter is, we're very concerned that policing be equitable across all boundaries. So the consideration is how we engage. It will be more than just a paper survey. We will be in your community. Frankly, it's our community.
The only thing I would add is simply coming from Compton, one, we serve people from all across the city. Our primary mission, I think, is to enhance the community's ability to have some input into this process. So we've got some ideas in terms of how we want to reach out, but we're certainly open to getting new ideas, and we clearly want to hear anybody who has anything to say that's relevant to this process. We understand DOJ did a fairly thorough investigation. We understand that a lot of the problems are concentrated, particularly in West Baltimore, but it doesn't mean that we are oblivious to the other parts of Baltimore. So again, the whole idea for us is to listen to anybody who has anything to say and to make sure that those ideas become a part of the process.
Thank you. The next question is going to come from my right.
Hi, yes. My question is, as a society, unfortunately, we are often reactive instead of proactive. So what do you have anything specific in your plan to help change the screening process of new police officers who are on the force, who become a part of the force?
And so we're pulling proactivity out of there, and you want to know their screening process for new officers.
Are you going to address any changes to the screening process?
Of how they're screened.
Of how police officers are selected?
A couple of things. First of all, I think the last group or the group before that made it perfectly clear in terms of understanding our role as monitor in this particular situation. The Baltimore City Police Department, the DOJ, have consigned a consent decree. Our job is to monitor those things that they agreed to put in place or put in place, and to provide community input to help be the liaison between that and technical support. So we have a number of people who have different areas of expertise that we can lend to Baltimore City Police Department as they complete their role in completing the consent decree. So that's our job. As said before, we are not the Baltimore City Police Department, and we don't command them. We are monitoring the process, but we have, I think, a unique perspective by being from Baltimore, have a unique perspective for the tremendous amount of expertise around here, and thus can provide technical assistance, climate assistance very easily. And again, I would add, on a daily basis, not on a quarterly or monthly basis from that standpoint. So, and understanding our role as monitor is important, that we are not making those specific demands on the police department. We are helping them. This is a partnership, and then a reporting to the court system. And I think, Michael, you are Richard wanted to add to that regarding this question.
No, he says you're good.
Okay. We're going to move now to the middle section. Anyone have a question from the middle section?
Good evening. Good evening.
Oh, okay.
Can everybody hear me on the panel?
Yep, we got you.
Very good. I'm going to share something, and I'm going to ask you a question. The night before the Freddie Gray riots, my niece was affected by SIDS. The responders, they did what they were supposed to do. They dispatched police officers. Baltimore City is a very aggressive city, and these streets saturate you with that aggressiveness, so there's a lot of attitude here. Because of the strife at that time, those police officers, the way they responded incorrectly, and my niece died because of that. Now, I had no intentions of coming here tonight, so I really didn't know nothing about no consent decrees and what it meant. So I started looking it up. And my question to y'all is, with this consent decree for Baltimore, is this more about the city and the police department not coming under civil rights litigation and being sued? Or is this really about reform and getting our community right? Because when I'm looking at this Washington Post article, for real, all this about is making sure that the police don't keep getting sued.
Thank
This ain't
you.
about our communities. So I'm asking you, what is this reform
We
for
got to
Baltimore
pause your
about?
question right there. So
That's
that-
my question, to make sure you know my question. Is this about making sure they don't get sued no more, or
I
about
got
our
you.
communities?
I got you. So pieces in there have to do with reform, but also it sounds like you were just thoroughly devastated and disappointed about the way the response happened. Yeah, I'm pulling. I got you. I absolutely have your question, and a part of our process is to pull out the things you were saying that were important to you so that they get posted for everybody to see as well. And so those pieces also have to do with you wanting to make sure that police are able to respond appropriately in order to save lives, and also be able to address the what you think is an inherent aggressiveness that sometimes Baltimore residents have. And so your question to this team is, do they think this process is just to avoid civil litigation against the city, or is it really about improving relationships between police and community?
I can absolutely guarantee you that this monitoring team, this process for this monitoring team, understanding the consent decree, the results of the Department of Justice investigation, is not about avoiding lawsuits. The purpose of our role, our application in this monitoring team, is to be a part of the process to make this city better. As I mentioned before, many of us on this panel was born and reared here. We're going to be here long after the end of this particular consent decree. We have a vested interest. My children are living in this city as residents. Their spouses are living in this city as residents. They graduated from the school system. So the objective of us applying the Powers Consulting Group, our mission, our passion, and then putting together the expertise had nothing to do with any kind of process of avoiding lawsuits. It has to do with sanctity of life. It has to do with increasing life chances. It has to do with making this city better for the police and the community. I am convinced that neither the community certainly want a dramatic reduction in crime. They want constitutional policing. And we've said over and over again in this monitoring process, the consent decree indicates that constitutional policing and dramatically reducing crime are not mutually exclusive. You can do policing the right way, reduce crime, and that's the purpose, I believe, of this consent decree. But more importantly, that's the purpose and the role this monitoring team sitting in front of you now will play in ensuring that the consent decree is followed as agreed upon by all parties, and in a transparent way reported to the community, and more importantly, reported to the court to indicate what progress is being made. I can guarantee you that, despite the Washington Post article or any other insinuation, I can say that about this team.
Were you about to say something?
Sorry.
This will be the last question.
I just want to add to respond to his question, because it was very humanistic when you used an example of your niece having the SIDS. And although we are a monitoring team, we're not there operationally to change the law or the way these things happen, but we are there to be able to respond and work with the department based on what we hear from the community. So, and I speak to this because I lost a grandchild to SIDS, and I had to respond on the 911 call, crying and screaming and trying to get information out so that they can get the right people involved. I'm still on the phone explaining to them what the situation is, and I hear the siren. But they sent 2 different types of teams out because I was able to relay to them what was actually going on. So if that's a situation, you come and you say to the monitoring team, where we'll be on here with you all the time, and you say, we'll have this issue, how do you get it across to the police department that we need a little bit more help here? That's what we could do, pass the word and help them if they need to make a change.
Let me just say real quickly, the only reason people get sued is because, I'm John Hutchins, the Coppin State sociologist. I just want to say that I don't think that your question, that the 2 things are mutually exclusive. The only reason people get sued is because somebody messed up. If we can stop them from messing up, then we won't have the lawsuits.
And additionally, I can just... Well, additionally, sir, I would like to say that I think this is true for our whole team. We look at this because we are so focused on the community and it being about the community. We are looking at this as a sort of truth and reconciliation process. And if you're not familiar with what a truth and reconciliation process is, I invite you to look at the 1995 Truth and Reconciliation process in South Africa and elsewhere.
So at this point, we'll have the Powers Group exit the stage to my right, and we will ask the Exeter team to enter the stage on my left.
So the next question will be coming from my left.
Hi, my name's Doug Colbert. I teach at Maryland Law School. I have a great deal of respect for the people from law enforcement, the academics, the people who are described as the experts. But I merely want to say that the real experts about policing do come from the community, and I would love to see more representation in the leadership of each team on the community. Your particular team, I noticed, was very heavily weighted, I think 83% towards law enforcement. And that leads to my question, which has to do with the code of silence and the brotherhood and sisterhood that exists among police officers. I've had many police officers come to me and want to report wrongdoing by other officers, but they're reluctant, they're afraid because of the consequences of reporting against another officer. I also read in the papers that the 7 officers who were indicted by the U.S. Attorney, the federal government, that they all were reported to have contacts within internal affairs, within the police department, even within the state's attorney's office, so they never could do a local prosecution because there were too many leaks there. What can the monitor do to address and eliminate the code of silence and to break the brotherhood that apparently exists among the police department, police officers?
So your question in there was, what will this team do to address and eliminate what you're calling the code of silence among police officers? And the pieces in there that we're pulling out, you're looking for heavier representation on a team from the community, but then also safety of police officers who want to be honest and transparent about unethical things that are happening in the department. Okay. The leadership of the team. Okay. The leadership. Thank you.
Well, let me start. First of all, thank you for your question, and we really appreciate the opportunity to be here with you this evening. Let me start with the last part of your question about accountability and about officers stepping forward when they see wrongdoing. That question was addressed by one of the earlier teams, and I thought they did a very good job of addressing it. And that is, you have to have in place you have to have an environment in which officers feel comfortable and safe in doing that. Right now, in many police departments, that's not the case. We have to create an environment, a culture, where misconduct and poor behavior is not the norm. It's not something that anyone else would tolerate. That needs to be the conversation in the locker room, for an example. That needs to happen on the street if you see something that's not right. It needs to stop, because it not only affects that one officer who might get in trouble. I think if we learned anything over the last 2 years or 3 years with all the negative publicity around policing, it paints us all with a very bad image. You can't escape it. What happens in one city affects other cities, let alone what's happening within your own department. And that's got to come across to the police officers. They need to be held accountable for their individual actions, but if there's any culpability at all, people who were part of it, maybe they weren't directly involved, but indirectly, either through their action or inaction, they need to be held accountable as well. And officers who do report misconduct need to be really rewarded and recognized for having the courage. In policing, we talk an awful lot about courage, and usually when we use that word, we're talking about running after some guy in an alley with a gun or whatever it is like that. Real courage is standing up to injustice. knowing it's wrong and having the courage to stand up and do something about it and not being afraid to do it. And we have to create a culture where people feel it's okay to do that. Because most of our officers that I've come in contact with over 47 years I've been in law enforcement really know. And I think it was someone in the audience that said, you don't need training to tell somebody's wrong to kick somebody in the head. She's right. You don't.
So part of the question, I think, is how that is done in the context of the consent decree. And we will be looking at the discipline, at the complaints, to understand whether or not there is the implication that some officer who was on the scene failed to fulfill his or her duty in reporting an incident. That's how the monitorship can put forth the concepts that Chuck was just describing.
Okay. The next question is coming from, we're over here now, right? I'm losing track. Yep, over here to my right. Thank you.
Hi. I would like to address the underlying tone to this meeting. The Baltimore Police Department, in my opinion, and I'm sure the audience will accept it as fact, has gotten away from serving and protecting and are now searching and destroying the community. To give us confidence in you, my question is, what members of the community or community organizations have you personally engaged, and what was the outcome of that encounter?
Okay, you straight to it.
Sorry, could you repeat the question?
So what were community organizations that you have engaged as a team, and what was the outcome of that engagement?
Yeah.
So thank you so much for asking that question. We've been reaching out to a number of community organizations in the greater Baltimore area, some of which will come to us as the organizations such as the Bel Air Edison Project or Living Classrooms Foundation. We've specifically targeted their Safe Streets program, as well as we've targeted their Fresh Start program. Some organizations have presented to us employees who would be strong to reach into constituencies. During the monitoring process and at this time, they can't throw their name of their organization behind any one group. But what I can assure you, and what's in our application and on public forums, is there have been 15 groups so far that have said to us that they want to stand behind the work that we're trying to do if they're given a voice to give that to us. They will serve as members of our monitoring advisory board, but we want more. We want you to tell us. For instance, the No Boundaries Coalition did a wonderful community engagement event at the start of our application process. And they have been working hard to bring a ton of different community groups together who represent a broad reach of Baltimore, from LGBTQ plus community members to the Latin community. We want to hear more from groups like that to tell us who we need to talk to. Not because we don't know, but because this is a big city, and from what you see is from where you sit. You know who's important to your community, and you've got to tell us so that we can engage those people. So to your question, we've worked with a number of different large organizations that have been known in the nonprofit sector here in Baltimore, but we need more community engagement individuals such as Mr. Kelly to join us in our efforts.
Thank you. Next question.
Yep, coming from the middle.
From what I'm gathering here is that the teams that's representing each other, themselves or whatever, you can come to the community and get ideas also to take to the police department or maybe the mayor or whatever. But my statement in question is, my father is a former police officer. And the thing that was special to me about him is that he lived in the community. Most of the police that is in Baltimore City do not live in the community, so they don't know the effects of the community, and they don't affect the community by sight like someone like my dad did when he was a police officer. So my question is, could it be presented to you, or would you present to whoever that you have to, the option of creating some type of incentives for inner city youth to become police, Baltimore City police?
So the piece we pulled out of there was relatability and officers having proximity to the residents right here in Baltimore. And so the question for the team is, will you be doing things to incentivize young people in Baltimore to become officers who live here?
Well, you know, you raise a good issue. When I first began my career, and I started in Chicago PD, every police officer had to live in a city. In fact, all city employees had to live in a city. I think maybe they still have a residency requirement, but many jurisdictions don't any longer. So that's why we have to make sure that our officers, whether they live in the city or don't live in the city, and I think that's where community policing is so important, they have to become a part of that community by understanding that community and serving that community, irrespective of where they may personally live. Now, in Philadelphia, where I just recently served, we had an Explorer program where we had young men and women, high school age young men and women, that could participate as police explorers, introduce them to law enforcement, introduce them to policing, get them involved, make it a little easier for them, quite frankly, when it came to taking the examinations and so forth. In other words, if they served as a police explorer for a 2-year period, they actually got credit to that toward their score on an entrance exam. Majority of the explorers were people of color, young men and women of color, Hispanic, African American, and white, but mostly African American and Hispanic. We were able to use that as a way of being able to get more minorities into the police department, and actually waive the 60-hour educational requirement for explorers as well, although we still encourage them to go to college and earn their degrees as well.
So again, just to put it in the context of the consent decree, there are two basic tasks that the monitor has. One is to measure compliance with the individual paragraphs of the consent decree, and the other is to provide technical assistance. We're going to do both of those, and we think we have an unparalleled team in each one of those aspects. We have a team that can provide the technical expertise, the technical assistance to Baltimore, the nationwide reform ideas that will help reform the department. That's on the technical assistance side. On the monitoring side, we have people who have monitored in Los Angeles and Seattle and Cleveland, and we can perform that as well. So there is a duality there that I think everybody has to recognize and appreciate the role of the monitor, but the role of the monitor can certainly be to put forward good ideas in each of the areas of questioning that we have heard this evening.
Hi, Jamar Brown. I'm a former prosecutor here in Baltimore City. And from my experience, I know that there are at least 3 Baltimore City agencies that are directly impacted by policing in this community. The State's Attorney's Office, which has been talked about, and Baltimore City Schools and the City Schools Police. Now, while these agencies are not parties to the consent decree, I think there's a lot to be gained from having the monitor team work with these organizations to try to build consensus and gain input. So what is Exeter's plan for creating engagement with these community organizations, these city agencies, from a community engagement standpoint?
Yeah. Thank you for the question. During the first 90 days that, if we're fortunate enough to be selected, that we are on the ground here in Baltimore, we will be engaging those city agencies just as we do other stakeholders in the process. Clearly, they are stakeholders in the process, and we need to engage them. I was a prosecutor myself for 12 years as a line assistant. I went back to the office in the Manhattan District Attorney's Office as the chief of staff there some 25 years later. I understand how important prosecution is to justice, to the criminal justice system, and we'll make sure that there's appropriate engagement with the prosecutor's office here in Baltimore. Chuck?
And there is a part of the consent decree that specifically addresses the Baltimore School Police and the Baltimore Police Department and the interaction between those two. And again, that gets back to something that was discussed earlier in the first part of this when you start talking about diversion, for an example. One of the things that one of our team members, Kevin Bethel, created was an excellent diversion program when he was one of my deputies in the Philadelphia Police Department with the Philadelphia schools that is very, very successful, and he's been going around various parts of the country helping other agencies implement it. But it is part of the consent decree. They are specifically mentioned in the consent decree. So we look forward to sitting down with the Baltimore Public Schools. We also look forward to sitting down and hearing from the state's attorney here in Baltimore.
We're going in order. It'll be on this side.
Yes, I'm curious about what advice you're going to give towards increasing accountability, because again, there have been a number of wide-ranging scandals involving several officers, not just one or two, and at some point there has to be accountability from sergeants, from lieutenants, from majors on up for what's going on under their noses.
Matthew?
And I just want to know what you would like to do as far as addressing accountability.
So this will be the last question.
I think that accountability is at the heart of what this consent decree is designed to achieve. You know, I think one of the things that is important about this Exeter group is that, you know, we have set up accountability mechanisms in other cities under consent decrees. There's not going to be any on-the-job training. We know where to look. We know what files to ask for. We know what rocks to overturn. And I think we're a pretty good judge of BS and can sniff it out from a mile away. That matters because this is not a voluntary kind of exercise, although we want to collaborate closely. And to the previous gentleman's question, we want to work with all stakeholders at the same table. You know, ultimately, there is a federal judge in charge of this, and the monitor, one of the many things the monitor does is to serve as an agent of that court. And so in some ways, the court and the monitoring team are a backstop to try to ensure that accountability is something that is something that is a value that the police department stands by. So whether it's...
Thank you, Exeter. Thank you very much.
Of course.
So at this time, we'd like to thank all of the monitors for their participation tonight and to thank you all as community members for participating. Our final community forum before a monitor team is chosen will be tomorrow night at Morgan State University. Finally, you can submit your thoughts by emailing baltimore.consent.decree@usdoj.gov. Thank you and have a good night.